Hello there, my Gumminess, and welcome back to the Echo Chamber. Now, getting back into what if Krillin trained with King Kai after being killed by Tambourine? We last left off with the Z-Fighters going up against the androids, where the battle became pretty decisive on both sides. Whereas Goku managed to defeat Android 16, 17, and 18 were able to overcome the Z-Fighters. But due to 17 and 18 not wanting to lose a strong member like 16, they ended up using their wits and deception in order to be able to grab him before Goku could completely finish him off. And we're picking up with this part right now.
Last night took a L, but tonight I bounce back. Wake up every morning, by the night I count stacks. Knew that ass was real when I hit it, bounce back.
Now, as described in the last part, Goku ended up to go check on the rest of his friends, basically making sure they were okay after their battle with the androids. And for the most part, everyone was essentially in good health, although they were quite devastated. None other than Vegeta, who really had a big attitude around the idea of losing to the android. After all, he had to completely wash the other ones. He did not understand. No matter how hard he trained, no matter how hard he pushed, Kakarot seemed to steal the show once again, as he was the only one who was able to defeat one of the androids. This caused Vegeta to immediately fly off in his own direction, with Trunks aiming to go after him, but Goku in turn stops him, basically saying that just leave Vegeta alone, that he probably needs some time to himself. But Trunks said that he wasn't going to let that happen. Who knows what crazy type of thing he would be able to get up into, which most of the group pretty much agreed to, and Goku realizing that he probably couldn't stop Trunks even if he wanted to. Not from a lack of power, but because he understood the connection with his own son, he decided to go on and let him go. In turn, the rest of the group began to discuss their next move, with Krillin basically being the one to point out the obvious, that other than Goku, none of them were really any match for the androids no matter how hard they train, that they would have to find another way to get stronger. And they didn't just want to rely on him, because who knows how actually more powerful the androids could have possibly been. Again, none of them know that 16 was actually the strongest among the group, and considering that they lost against 17 and 18, from their perspective, they are probably the strongest among the group, or at least that's a thought anyway. Goku then perks up and mentions the hyperbolic time chamber, which does end up confusing Krillin, but he's really the only one, as everyone else in the group has at least heard of the hyperbolic time chamber, recognizing the idea of what it means if they were able to use it, figuring that even if the other two androids were stronger, Goku was still able to take one of them down, meaning that if they just were able to do one day, at least one day of intensive training, they'd probably be able to overcome the androids no problem, which does get the others' hopes up, because in fact, whereas they did lose against the androids, it's not like they did entirely terribly bad. In fact, nobody really suffered all that many too serious injuries. They were hurt, nothing that was anywhere near life-threatening. Piccolo, on the other hand, suggested another way that he might be able to possibly get stronger by fusing with Kami, but they wanted to go over with the rest of the group, considering that would mean that they would lose the Dragonballs. In the end, the group coming to the decision that they best leave that off the table, at least for now, as there was no real reason that Piccolo would have to do that. Again, he didn't really lose all that badly, and in fact, more so than even the other groups, he did almost as good as Vegeta when it came to fighting the androids. Sure, at the beginning, everyone was caught off guard, which is why they did so poorly in the first place, but given the fact that they actually got to fight the androids this time around after being healed up by the sensor beams, they recognized the idea that the power gap wasn't as big as they thought it was. And once again, there was all the hype from the fact that Goku was able to take down one of the androids, potentially killing it. So the group comes to the decision that Piccolo should hold off on the idea of fusing with Kami, as the situation doesn't really seem all too serious enough for that to be a conclusion for them to come to. Besides, if anything did go wrong, they rather have the Dragon Balls on hand. So with everyone in agreement, they head off towards the lookout in order to be able to go into their hyperbolic time chamber. All except Goku and Gohan, who actually head off looking for Vegeta and Trunks, in the hopes of being able to convince them that they can use this training too. After all, they would probably need all the help that they can get. Again, just trying to stay extra prepared, not necessarily because they want to throw bodies at the situation, but just in case anything else arises. Who knows how many things have changed from the future that Trunks originally told them about. And so they want to make sure they're basically prepared for any type of situation that should arise, although the group could not foresee how right they would be in choosing this decision. As we transition over to some far-off town, where we see a complete desolation. What should be a bustling city is a complete wasteland with nothing but empty clothes lying around, as we see a tall green monster with his tail stuck in the last person that was alive, draining them dry. Now you guys know that this is none other than Cell, who actually is in a bit of a frenzy, as what he's actually been doing this whole time has been sucking up people a lot more than what he did in the original canon, in order to be able to get significantly stronger, as this whole time he was actually feeling the battle powers of everyone that was fighting, recognizing that both Goku and Gohan were massively stronger than what he thought they were, and he kind of understood that the number of people he would need to absorb in order to be able to capture the androids was vastly more than what he originally probably thought. Considering, once again, like I said, in the original, it's really an unquantifiable number that he absorbed after his battle with Piccolo to get strong enough in order to be able to take out both him and 17, but still you can just assume whatever number you choose to give him, it's at least double that number in this continuity. So with Cell basically in panic mode, he continued to suck up people, far more than what he did originally, and ended up coming to the conclusion that he had sucked enough in order to be able to challenge the Z-Fighters. He was still wary of going up against them, as maybe the number games will be what does him in, because even if he was secure in the idea that he was more powerful than them, he still would be at a significant risk, as if they all joined forces, they can probably still defeat him. So now he was more worrisome that he wouldn't be able to achieve his perfection, and started indeed to get ready to prepare a hunt for the androids instead of going to confront the Z-Fighters. But still he kept a low profile as to not let his energy leak out for anybody to be able to track him down. But lucky enough for him, he would actually see the androids flying overhead. What a great coincidence, he thought to himself, as he's going to be more elated to the idea that the androids were right here in front of him, and now he could achieve his perfection and become the most powerful being on Earth, achieving the dream that Dr. Zero had set out for him. The androids overhead would actually shock themselves by the complete desertion of the entire city, but landing on the nearby building, they tried to tend to 16, but he was basically reporting the idea that he was far too damaged, and that they should leave him and continue on the mission without him, that no matter what, they had to kill Goku. The androids, of course, were a bit taken aback by this, as they understood the sentiment and logic, but at the same time, 16 was just kind of like giving up so easily. But they didn't really get enough time to contemplate this, as right behind them they can hear a voice. Basically a voice of Cell calling out to them, saying hello to his brother and sister, licking his lips as a very sinister smile was etched across his face. Meanwhile, Goku and Gohan ended up meeting up with both Trunks and Vegeta in the middle of a wasteland. Trunks and Vegeta hadn't been talking to each other, just kind of like how they did in the original, when basically Goku showed up after getting cured from the heart virus. But this time around, they still try to go with the whole idea of convincing them, and it doesn't really take too much as it did in canon, as Vegeta is a bit more kinder here, and thus his reluctance to really go with Goku or use any methodology that he would use in order to get stronger is a little bit more loose and lax. Besides, he had built a familial bond with Gohan as well, which is why Goku brought him along, as he was able to pick up on this, with the connection that Gohan also had with Trunks just being an obvious bonus. So the two are able to convince them, and the whole group heads over to the lookout with the others. Once they meet with everyone else, they realize that no one else ever went into the time chamber yet. Now, just like in canon, Vegeta and Trunks do go in first, but this time Vegeta's actually less reluctant to have Trunks tag along. In fact, he wants him to tag along. He felt the power that Gohan was able to produce against Android 16, and figuring that it might have something to do with his potential. After all, he trained with him before and had already had these types of thoughts going through his head. And he figured that if he can push Trunks to the same heights, that this would be more of a way to challenge himself. That way he can get even stronger than what he already was. Again, really trying to focus on the idea of becoming more powerful than Goku, as well as the androids, but more so just trying to benefit himself, as he wants to become the strongest. That part of his personality hasn't changed. But except this time around, he's just not going to be as dismissive towards Trunks. Back with the androids in Cell, it is clear that the battle did not go well for the androids. The city is entirely in ruins. 16 is otherwise torn apart and essentially ripped to pieces. Although he is still barely clinging to life, he has been otherwise dismantled, and standing in front of him is a badly beaten and otherwise broken Android 17, who's barely clinging to life himself. Cell menacingly walks towards him while being in his second form. I know some people may question this, saying that 17 had to go first and then 18, but I don't think it really mattered the order. Subsequent material, including games and other stuff, whether you consider that non-canon or not, has showed that the order doesn't necessarily really matter. As long as they both get sucked up, Cell can achieve his perfect form, and that whoever he sucked up first would have probably just gave him the second form. So in this case, given the fact that 18 is much weaker, she would most likely get sucked up, first versus 17. But that doesn't really matter, as 18 had already been consumed, and therefore Cell was in his second form, again walking menacingly towards 17. A dismantled 16 just on the ground, basically barely clinging to life. 17 does still try to put up a valiant and noble fight, but it all ended up the same, and Cell ends up achieving his perfect form, the power being so massive that the Z-Fighters have no choice but to put their attention towards it, as they feel a massive increase in power, and it kind of terrifies them, because none of them can even remotely stand up to this power. Not Goku, not Gohan, not any of the other Z-Fighters, and they're just baffled, entirely confused as to what was going on. They weren't even really thinking about it too much up until now, because after all, they couldn't feel the android's ki. But this new energy that they were feeling, it seemed like it was a combination of all of their energies. They can feel each one of them felt their selves in this creature. And they knew that things had went from bad to worse. And unfortunately for them, they still had 23 hours to go before Vegeta and Trunks would exit the time chamber, meaning that whatever this new threat was, they would have to hold it off and face it alone. But with everyone scared to death, no one was even willing to make the first move to try and go and confront whatever this thing was that had this massively ominous power. However, eventually Goku was the one to make the first plunge, teleporting down after waving goodbye to all of his friends and family, figuring that there was a likelihood that he probably wouldn't come back. But at least maybe, just maybe, if he were to use something that he had been saving up until now, he could potentially hold this thing off at least long enough for Vegeta and Trunks to exit the time chamber. Goku now reappearing in Cell's blind spot, fully in his Super Saiyan transformation. He was about to go for a punch right towards his face, hoping to catch him off guard and at least surprise him with a barrage of attacks, figuring that he would have to play the game of cat and mouse in order to be able to hold Cell off. But Cell easily deflects his punch. In fact, he doesn't even move a muscle. He just stands there and takes it. Goku tries to land more attacks on him, but he realizes that none of them are doing anything to him. Cell finally goes tired of admiring himself and his own perfection and ends up catching Goku's last punch, easily hitting him in the gut and knocking Goku straight out of Super Saiyan, before holding him by the throat and calling a divine act of providence that Goku ended up showing up before him, but that he won't be dealing with him right away. After all, the reason why he was in such a haste to gain his perfection was because Goku was the one who actually pushed him to this. Him and another person, that being of course as we know Gohan, exceeded his parameters for what he thought the abilities of them were. Far be it for him to not acknowledge power when he sees it. And so he basically poses a question to Goku, saying that if he had more time, could he potentially get even stronger than what he displayed against the androids? Goku was a bit taken aback by this question at first, but managed to struggle out a yes, that he would be more than capable of destroying him, which made Cell laugh as he loosened his grip and dropped Goku to the ground, basically saying he'd give them 10 days, pointing out the idea that in 10 days he would be hosting a tournament to bring all the Z fighters that he wanted in order to meet him at the battlefield, and once he killed them all, he would destroy the Earth. So they have 10 days to get stronger in order to provide a challenge for him. He then kicks the defeated Goku away, knocking him through several buildings before smiling and flying off, which was the last thing Goku saw before entirely blacking out. When he awoke again, he was back on the lookout, surrounded by all of his friends, wanting to know what had happened. And after Goku explained the situation, the entirety of the Z fighters fell into depression as they realized just how dire the situation was. But then Krillin perked up and rallied the group, basically telling them that Cell gave them 10 days, and considering what they were already gearing up to do, 10 days will be more than enough, and that despite everything that has happened, they should actually be looking at this as somewhat of a gift. Krillin's optimism really does light a fire under the group, and they start to perk up again, realizing that there was still a chance that they would be able to do it, that even though all hope seemed lost, they might still be able to claw their way back from the jaws of defeat. Goku actually ended up putting a hand on Krillin's shoulder, basically giving him a thumbs up, telling him that he did a good job, acknowledging that he was in. And so with the countdown to Doomsday having now begun, the group prepares for the fight of their lives that will decide the fate of the world.
And that is the end right there, guys. Now, I do want to apologize, as I would have really continued this part on, but I'm currently working on some other things and stuff at the time, so I was trying to essentially make sure that I got this out in the right frame of time, and like I said before in the previous video, this one should be coming out within a week of it, so for me, it's only been like a few hours since I started recording again since the last video. And so basically, hopefully, I am able to get this one out to you guys, like I said, within that week time frame. If not, maybe a little bit after, but definitely it'll be sooner than the last one came out. Either way, I will catch you guys in the next one. Again, sorry about the cliffhanger, but don't worry, I'm still working on the other part, which will be the end to the Cell Saga, and then we'll be ready to move on to the Buu Saga. So I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.
And to all my Gummy Knights, new and old, just remember, this is a man's world, but it would be nothing without his brain and his bronze. And lying is indeed the most fun that a woman can have, without taking off her clothes. Good night.